Well, so the debate is whether, at the end of his life, whether he became a believer, which I think is the way my Uncle David puts it in the Wikipedia page that he created. Um, and so I guess the first thing is that I think the context is that throughout his life as a Jewish educator, he wanted very much to create a system that could create continuity in Judaism through Jewish culture rather than through temple prayer services, which was really the way the Orthodox community and the Hasidic community maintained continuity in a different way. But within the temple community, which is mainstream U.S. Jewish community, the thing you did to be a Jew was you went to temple on Shabbos, on the holidays, and you prayed. And I think that his, hope had been to educate Jews and Jewish children, create a system where they could be educated in a different way with a different set of content that would still maintain continuity. And it was clear, I think, by the 60s that that had failed. And
Meaning the Shalom Aleichem.
the Shalom Aleichem was his community. There were others that had tried to do similar things, and but let's say Shalom Aleichem Shul was the his effort at that, and the effort of his cohort. So that had largely failed. I think he was disappointed in his kids for not having passed it down. And
Meaning him to them or them
no,
to their kids?
them to their kids. So my Uncle David, my Aunt Judy, my mother didn't effectively pass down Yiddish to us by speaking it in the house, for example, by making it a more important part of our family life. We just became sort of generic Jews in Great Neck or in Huntington or wherever, and they did more than somebody who did nothing. I mean, they sent us to Jewish camp, they sent us to Shalom Aleichem Folk Shul, but from his perspective, and I think he was right, those were so watered down and as to become essentially ineffective that it's difficult with that amount of time on task to actually transmit the language, transmit literary competency, transmit a substantial amount of culture, and so that had all kind of fallen. It wasn't working. And so I think he was revisiting the idea that maybe the traditions that went with rabbinic Judaism and with with temple Judaism, which he had rejected as being old-fashioned and sort of wooden and meaningless, and that he didn't himself carry forward when he came to America, had value for a continuity purpose. And like I say, educating me to the point where I could do a bar mitzvah would be an example of that. It wasn't that reading from the Torah was necessarily the only way of being a Jew, but because I hadn't managed to gather enough competency in other ways, he was looking at that as something that was an alternative to what he really would have wanted most. So I think that he was wrestling with this idea of how much of old traditions that were liturgy tied to bring back and to try to adopt for continuity purposes. That's different from saying he wants to bring them back and adopt them for belief purposes. And so I don't think there's any debate that he was wrestling with what maybe we made a mistake by jettisoning all this old stuff. But I don't think that leads to any kind of a conclusion that because the old stuff was associated with God worship, that he was buying back into God worship. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, even if he was wrestling with the idea of bringing back some of the old traditional ways of observance, I never saw him do it. I have his tallis we talked about before. I never saw him wear the tallis. I don't think I ever saw him wear a yarmulke. I don't believe that I never saw them set up a sukkah in the back. They had admittedly a very small space to do it in, and somebody might have had to go back there someday with a chainsaw to get rid of the weeds that had grown to be 10 or 12 feet tall. But I don't remember him ever setting up a sukkah to observe sukkahs. So, even if he was starting to come to the conclusion that these old rituals and observances were valuable, it wasn't clear that they were valuable to him, and he didn't need them in order to maintain his Jewish identity. He was educated, and he was Jewish through and through. But I think he was thinking of those things as ways of bringing a younger generation back into some kind of substantive Jewish content, not because they were somehow God and prayer related. Because if he had in fact gone back to becoming a believer, then perhaps he would have actually started himself adopting some of these old God-related rituals. Why not wear a yarmulke? I mean, go for it, right? Why not go and pray? I never saw him pray. And other than, I guess, in Passover, the Haggadah has, prayers over the wine and the matzah. And you say the prayers as a part of the Passover Seder. I never, at a meal with him, never saw him say a prayer. I think Bubby would have yelled at him probably if he had, for sure. Maybe he was afraid to, I don't know. But I don't really think so. I don't think he was afraid of anything really, but I never saw him pray. So I'm highly skeptical that any of his sort of reevaluation and his questioning of conclusions that he had come to and directions that he had taken were a symptom of having become a believer. I just don't. And so my uncle also has this expression. There's a Yiddish expression that he talked about that he also uses to bolster his argument. I don't know what the expression is. It's kind of it's similar to Einstein's saying that God doesn't play with dice. So I think that the rough translation of it, and I don't know the Yiddish, is that the world is not chaos or something like that. But what does that really mean? I mean, that can mean a lot of different things. It doesn't mean that there's a guy up there who is self-aware and who has a hand in things and directs how stuff proceeds. It doesn't even mean that there's a guy up there who no longer directs how things proceed, but once did direct how things proceed. It doesn't necessarily mean any of those things. So I'm really very, very highly skeptical about this notion that he became a believer. I think it's just basically not true. It's not consistent with anything that I saw of him when I was a kid, or any of the facts that I'm aware of in terms of how he conducted himself and conducted his life at the end.